Sharing is caring in the umbrella department. Love it when players share their umbrellas with the ball kids.
If you were sitting in the second row at the Steffi Graf Stadion on a warm Berlin afternoon this week, you would have seen something strange before you saw any tennis. You would have seen a small German girl, maybe 9 years old, walk out onto the court carrying a microphone that was almost the size of her forearm. You would have seen her look up at a 21-year-old woman from Quezon City, ranked number 35 in the world, and ask her in careful English why she loved tennis.
I love tennis because it makes me feel empowered, confident. It makes me feel strong.
And you would have seen that 21-year-old Alex Eala lower herself slightly so the answer would land at the right height. 4,500 seats. A stadium named for one of the greatest athletes Germany ever produced. A wild card from the Philippines, a child reporter from Berlin, and a microphone passed between them like something fragile. That is the image. That is where this story actually begins. Not with a scoreline, but with a kids' press conference the WTA published to its own channels and a crowd that had already decided, before the tennis started, that they liked her. Here's the strange part. The WTA chose Eala for that marquee mic'd-up segment before she had beaten anyone in Berlin. She arrived as a wild card, ranked 35th in a draw stacked with top 10 players. Her venue, the Steffi Graf Stadion at LTTC Rot-Weiss, holds about 4,500 people and carries the name of a woman who won 22 Grand Slam singles titles. Tournament marketers who know exactly which faces sell tickets in the German tennis market looked at the field and chose her. Not the local favorite, not the defending champion, her. And then she had to go and earn it. There is an honest version of the skeptic's case, and any documentary about Alex Eala has to voice it. Through the spring of 2026, a reasonable tennis observer could have looked at her results and concluded she was a hard court specialist riding the residual heat of her Miami 2025 semifinal. She lost in the first round at Stuttgart on clay. She lost in the first round at Roland Garros in May. She had been beaten badly by Linda Noskova at Indian Wells, dropping just 2 games across the match. The narrative was almost writing itself. Gifted Filipino player, generational ceiling breaker for her country, but perhaps a specific kind of player on a specific kind of surface. And perhaps the Miami run was the peak rather than the proof. That reading was not unfair in March. It was not unfair in early May. It was the kind of measured skepticism that experienced tennis writers extend to every breakthrough player, because tennis history is littered with one-tournament wonders. The question Berlin asked quietly was whether the wild card they had chosen to feature could turn that skepticism into something else. And the answer, when it came on grass, a surface no one had identified as her best, across 12 days that began at a small tournament in Birmingham and ended in front of a German crowd that already somehow knew her name. So let us build it the way it actually happened, starting with the image, because the image is the thesis of this story. On June 17th, the WTA published the Mic'd Up Kids press conference. Eala sat across from a row of German child reporters and answered their questions in English about her favorite shot, about why she plays, about her age.
How old are you?
The clip moved through the WTA's Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok feeds, and it pulled comments in Tagalog, German, English, and Spanish underneath. That clip is the cultural symbol artifact of this week. A 21-year-old from Quezon City in a stadium named for a German legend, fielding questions from German children with the patience of someone who understands that the microphone matters more than her answer. The WTA's marketing team had read the room correctly, but marketing instinct still needed her to back it up on court. She did, twice in 48 hours. On June 18th, in the round of 16, Eala faced the second-ranked player in the world, Elena Rybakina.
Just beat the world number 2.
The reigning Australian Open champion, a Wimbledon champion, a server whose game is supposed to overwhelm exactly the kind of player Eala is on exactly the kind of surface they were playing on. Eala won 7-5, 6-4. That is not a Cinderella scoreline. That is a top-tier professional result. It was her 6th career top 10 win. And after the match, she called Rybakina the one to beat. Then on court, in front of 4,500 people, she pulled out her phone and called her dad. The WTA's own headline read, "We were screaming. Eala calls her dad on court after upset of Rybakina." A 21-year-old reaching for her family in front of a stadium full of strangers in a country she had no roots in, and the strangers smiling at it, leaning forward, recognizing the gesture for what it was. That is the second cultural symbol moment of the week, and it happened without translation, because that kind of moment does not need any. Take a breath here, because what follows is the part of the story where affection turns into evidence. Berlin had already chosen to feature her. Berlin had already watched her call her father from center court. The question was no longer whether Berlin liked her. The question was whether she could justify the room she had been given. 24 hours later, the doubters got their last test case. The quarterfinal, June 19th, Eala against the 6th seed, Elina Svitolina, a former world number 3, a Grand Slam semifinalist, a mother who came back to the tour and reasserted herself inside the top 10. Eala won 6-3, 6-4 in 1 hour and 23 minutes. 19 winners, 9 unforced errors, 5 breaks of serve. That is not the line score of a fluke. That is wire-to-wire control against one of the most accomplished players of the last decade. It pushed Eala into her first WTA 500 semifinal, and her live ranking is projected to climb to roughly the world's top 30 once the new rankings are issued. And then almost immediately, she did something on the court microphone that the cameras did not need to embellish. She talked about Svitolina. Elina is a huge fighter, and I've seen it many times. I've been watching her since I was a kid, so to be able to compete with her today is such an honor, and I really admire her. She's a mother, and I find her to act with such elegance and strength, and I'm really lucky to have had this match today. You can beat someone 6-3, 6-4, and still call them elegant. That is the sentence. That is the gap between her game and her words, and Berlin noticed. She was honest about the closeout, too. That was the most difficult moment of the match. It's not easy, especially when she's coming back and being more aggressive. In the end, I was able to just conjure everything I had left in my brain, and it ended well. Conjure everything she had left in her brain. That is the voice of a 21-year-old who knows exactly what she just did and who is too tired to dress it up. And it brings us back to that little girl with the microphone 2 days earlier, because none of this, the kid's press conference, the dad phone call, the elegance line, is improvised charm. It is the same person on and off the court behaving consistently, which is what makes it readable as a cultural symbol, which is also almost forgotten in the noise of the last 48 hours, the second act of a 12-day grass surge that began on June 7th when she won the Birmingham Open WTA 125 title by beating Nikola Bartunkova 5-7, 6-3, 7-5 in a 3-set final. The Berlin run is not a one-off vibe. It is built on competence the casual viewer didn't see. The authority signal here is not a single quote from a single legend. It is a pattern. The WTA's editorial desk has been building content around Alex Eala for months. There was a Stuttgart sit-down feature in April 2026 in which she talked about embracing stardom and the weight of Filipino passion behind her. There was the Mic'd Up Kids press conference. There were on-court interviews, headline match recaps, social channel clips. Tournaments and tours do not invest that much editorial real estate in a player they think is a passing story. They invested in a player they believe the audience will keep choosing to watch. That editorial pattern is the loudest available authority signal, louder in some ways than any single pundit endorsement, because it represents the WTA Tour, the entity with the most data on what audiences actually want betting on her presence as a recurring draw. Beyond that, the existing analyst conversation about her game. Analysts including Andrea Petkovic and Greg Rusetsky have publicly discussed her serve and her conditioning as the developmental frontiers of her career, frames her as a player whose ceiling is genuinely undefined. Martina Navratilova has spoken about her ball striking. None of that needs to be invented. It is on the record, and it points in one direction. The tennis establishment is treating Alex Eala not as a story to be explained, but as a player to be tracked. So what are the actual stakes here beyond a semifinal in Berlin? 3 things, layered. First, the European market. Berlin is the second German tournament after Stuttgart, where Eala has been featured by tournament marketing in 2026. The WTA Tour is treating her as European audience bankable in a market that historically gravitates to Angelique Kerber, Eva Lise, Jules Niemeyer, Tatjana Maria. That is not a small signal. Germany is one of the most tennis-literate countries on the women's tour, and that audience is not easily charmed. They have been. Second, the seeding implication. Eala appears on track to be seeded at a Grand Slam for the first time at Wimbledon. Depending on the post-Berlin ranking release, seeding is structural. It changes who you avoid in early rounds, which changes the math of a deep run. Third, the narrative. The wildcard frame. The storyline that has followed her since Miami 2025, where she became the first wildcard ever to beat 3 major champions in straight sets at a single WTA event, is becoming inadequate to describe what she actually is. She is the first Filipino player inside the top 30 in WTA history. She is 6 top 10 wins deep, against Madison Keys, against Iga Swiatek in Miami, against Jasmine Paolini in Dubai, against Coco Gauff in Indian Wells, against Rybakina, against Svitolina. That is not a wildcard's resume. That is a seeded player's resume being filed under the wrong heading, and Berlin may be the week that filing error finally gets corrected. None of this means the road ahead is clear. The vulnerability is real and recent. The first-round exit at Roland Garros in May. The first-round exit at Stuttgart on clay. The Indian Wells fourth-round loss to Linda Noskova in March, where Eala won only 2 games across the match. And Noskova is, almost cruelly, exactly who waits in Saturday's Berlin semifinal. By the time you are watching this, the rematch may already be in the books. What can be said with certainty is that Eala's response to setback this season has been to find a different surface, do quieter work on it, and re-emerge sharper. 6 weeks separated the French Open first round from the Berlin semifinal. In those 6 weeks, she won a title and beat 2 top 10 players on a surface no one had previously called hers. So let's land this where it has to land. Belonging in professional tennis is not conferred by a passport, and it is not conferred by a ranking number. It is conferred when a stadium named for one of the greatest players in the history of the sport treats a 21-year-old wildcard from Quezon City as a featured story. And then she walks out the next day and beats the second-ranked player in the world to prove that the city had a good eye. Berlin did not adopt Alex Eala this week. Berlin recognized her. That is a different verb. And it is the verb the Filipino fans flooding the WTA's comment sections in Tagalog already knew applied. The ones writing Mahal Kita under every clip. The ones who have been waiting for the rest of the tennis world to catch up. And all 4,500 seats in the Steffi Graf Stadion stood up for the elegance line, and for the phone call to her dad, and for the wild card who turned out not to be a wild card at all. Picture the little girl with the microphone one more time. She is going to grow up knowing that the first professional athlete she ever interviewed was a Filipina who answered her question carefully, on a court named for a German legend, on the week Alex Eala stopped being someone the tennis world was learning about and became someone it already knew. If you want to follow what happens next, the Berlin final if it comes, the Wimbledon seeding when it lands, the next chapter of a career that is no longer asking permission, subscribe and stay with us through the grass season. She belongs in the conversation now. The room she's standing in just confirmed it.